Hello, this is Nikki Stafford, and this week I have brought my husband on here, Rob, or Robert. What do you want me to call you?
Either or is fine.
Either or is fine. So, Rob and I watched Buffy when it first aired live from 1997 to 2003. He has not been watching the rewatch with me all the way through. But the thing that you need to know about Rob is that he has a mind like a steel trap and seems to remember things that he saw years ago, correct?
I guess that
He's
was
one
the
of
case.
those people that sees a movie and can quote every line from it the moment we leave the theater. Meanwhile, 2 weeks later, I'm like, what was that movie about again? But he just remembers everything. So he didn't actually need to do the rewatch. However, what we're going to do this week is we are going to discuss the finale of season 6. Now, the reason that I early on snagged this particular episode and said that I wanted to do it in the rewatch, and particularly with Rob, is because a lot of people, as we've been discussing throughout the rewatch, hated season 6. And a lot of people did not like season 7 either. I thought season 7, by the way, is extraordinary. So I'm really looking forward to the first timers watching it. And I loved season 6. Rob in particular, I remember you always say that you think that the finale of season 6 is the best of all of them.
I agree. I've always thought that well, actually, I'm not. Yeah, I guess the finale, the last 2 episodes. So if we consider that as one episode, then yes, I would think that's
and what we
always
did,
been my favorite.
Because Rob hasn't been watching, what I did was we watched 4 in a row. I've always actually seen Seeing Red as part of the 4-part finale. Now, for everyone who was not watching it live, the way they aired it was you saw Seeing Red, and then Villains, and then Two to Go and Grave were actually aired as 1 2-hour episode than that on the same night. So in my mind, and probably in yours, those final 2 episodes are the finale. But the 2 leading into it are necessary. And so I've always seen it as one arc that's very, very tight. So part of the problem that people had with season 6 is just how dark it got. And as I've talked about off and on here, there is an excellent book you really should pick up called Buffy Goes Dark. It's edited by Elizabeth Rambo. And the reason I love the title is because it's specifically about Buffy season 6 and 7. So Buffy went dark, i.e. the show came to an end, but Buffy herself actually went dark. And part of the darkness of season 6 is Willow's addiction and what happens to her at the end. And so was that particularly effective for you to use Willow as the character that goes dark?
Well, I don't see how they had any other choice other than to use Willow in that way, because you have to have a character who has this moment, this emotional response to something that's so dramatic that it creates the drama that follows over the next 2 episodes. And I don't think, I mean, I know there's a lot of talk, and you and I talked about this before, but the so-called Terra kittens and the people who believe in what's it called, the dead lesbian...
The dead or evil lesbian cliche, they call it. And academically, I see the point. I can see where they're going. But as Cynthia Masson, who contributed to last week's rewatch, and she and I were actually discussing this leading up to it, and both of us agreed that academically we see it, emotionally it worked for us, and I think it worked for a lot of people.
I just think it's ridiculous to try to put a conceit about sexuality into what is a plot-driven program. I mean, they had to have something dramatic happen so they could push Willow to her limits, so she'd do something, take her to the breaking point. Otherwise, the show doesn't work. So I don't think anybody's thinking, oh, let's kill her lesbian lover. I think they're thinking, let's kill her lover and see what happens. Mm-hmm. It could have been a man, could have been a woman. It just so happens in this instance that they went that way. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it worked quite effectively, because you think, she sort of goes, she has that kind of moment after Tara dies where she comes off as really flat. Like, she now has a mission.
She's in shock.
And her mission is to kill all 3 of the Troika, and that's just, and nobody's going to get in her way.
Yeah.
And it's not until, the end of the episode you see kind of her actual emotional reaction to everything. Anyway, I find that part sort of necessary and actually quite effective, to be honest.
Yeah, and Willow, from the beginning, from the very first episode, was the fan favorite. This is a show that pulled in people who were outsiders, just like a lot of sci-fi and genre shows do. They pull in people who are outsiders, who were bullied. And a lot of us watching that show, this person included, remember standing at the water fountain and having someone standing behind them making fun of their clothes because they were from Sears. And in my case, they actually were. And so when Cordy has that, look who's seen the softer side of Sears moment, your heart just goes out to Willow and you want to hug her. Willow, sweet Willow, long-haired Willow. The one who was pining for Xander. The one who was pining for Oz and then became Oz's girlfriend. And then the one who changed and became more powerful and more powerful. But at her heart, at her core, she's still our Willow. And we love her. We love our Willow. And so Joss Whedon, as he always does, well, let's kill the character that they'll love the most. Or let's take the character that people identify with the most, which is who Willow is for a lot of us, and turn her into the darkest sort of character we possibly can. And then they'll be on the edge of your seats. And it worked because she's so dark. And for me, one of my favorite relationships, because this is my other favorite on the show, is the one between Willow and Giles. And while we see Giles being a father figure to Buffy throughout the series, he sees Willow as almost his protege or his companion, as in companion who they work side by side on the logistical side of things while Buffy goes out and fights the fight. Willow has always been at Giles' side, looking through the books and being on the computer. And so that's why in my book, as you pointed out, I commented on one particular scene being my favorite of the entire series. Which one was that?
I like to test that theory. The moment at the end of the first of the two-part where Giles appears in this, and you pointed out, I think he's been gone for what, 12 or 13 episodes?
He's been gone since the end of Tabula Rasa, which was episode 8, I believe, and so there has been this feeling throughout the season that the world is falling apart, and Giles isn't here to help us pick it up, which is part of the point. I know a lot of people feel like Giles abandoned her. In real life, Anthony Stewart had said, look, my family lives in Bath, England, I don't see them very often, and my girls are getting to an age where I want to see them more often, and that's what he did. But they realized how important he was, and I still remember we had a big party. Remember that? We had a big party the night of the season 6 finale, and so it was the 2-hour for us, and they'd had a break, and that's where it broke between the 2 episodes, was Giles standing there, because that's the end of the part 1, basically. And the whole group, all episode, we just kept going, come on, Giles, because we hadn't read spoilers. We didn't know he was actually coming back, but we were so convinced that he had to, that when Willow goes flying across the room and all of a sudden the camera turns, remember, the place erupted and we were screaming and jumping off the couches and everything, that no one actually heard the famous 6 words that he then delivers. And when it went to commercial, I was recording it on VHS, yes, VHS at the time, and I rewound it on the commercial break so we could all see it and we all cheered again. And I think part of that group experience really made that cement for me.
But it's still, I find it still a really significant moment in television. I mean, there's been a bunch of moments, when Omar gets killed in the wire, all these things that are really significant to me, but that's among them. They're really, I think, really, I can't be, if people haven't watched The Wire, it's not my fault.
But we're trying to get them to watch The Wire.
Okay, anyway, continue.
Anyway, spoilers, sorry about that. This is why I read about television, you read about golf. Anyway, so we've now run through Willow and Giles being part of the Scoobs, but that fourth, aside from Buffy, extremely important person in the Scoobies is
Xander.
And Xander has been feeling throughout the series, like he's the guy who gets beat up and thrown in the corner and everyone has to save him. The beginning of season 5 in Dracula, or Buffy versus Dracula, he actually says at the end, I am tired of being everyone's butt monkey and it's not going to happen anymore. And yet it continues to happen. He still continues to be the guy who, as he puts, can drywall you into oblivion.
But he has no special skill. Almost everybody else in the show has some, like Giles is brilliant and Buffy is Buffy and Willow has, her
research
Wicca,
and the Wicca, yeah.
And Xander doesn't really have any skill. Like Xander's kind of the average guy.
Xander is the heart, though. Like,
Well,
that's how I see
we
him.
find that out, but I don't
No,
know.
we've known
you
it
thought
from
that
the
beforehand?
beginning.
I don't think that was as illustrated as well up until this point.
No. Right from season 1, it's Xander who takes everything personally. It's Xander who gets so upset that he says the most vicious things. I mean, Xander is always the one who will say the vicious thing that everyone else is thinking, but no one would ever say. Except for Xander. And I think that's him. He's the one who has his heart in his sleeve. And so it is necessary. It had to be Xander who walked out onto that cliff and said what he said. And that scene, I mean, I don't even know if you looked at me at all, but every time I see that scene, it's just tears streaming down my face. It's just glorious, don't you think?
It's very well written, and it's beautifully crafted, and it's smart.
And it's Xander and it's Willow, and we're coming back to the two people who started the group, right? Before there was Buffy, before there was Giles, Xander and Willow were best friends.
Yeah, before Buffy comes setting up, right?
Yeah. And that's what's so important, and that's why that scene is so moving and extraordinary. You know, I cried at the end of Becoming, obviously. I cried when Angel killed Jenny Calendar in Passion and we saw Giles mount those stairs to her bed. I cry all the time in Buffy. I cried when Joyce died throughout the episode. I cried when Buffy died. But there's something different. There's something cathartic and wonderful in that particular scene. You're crying because you're so happy that love won out. That love and caring is what won out. It didn't matter how many times she slashes him and tells him to get back. His constant "I love you" is the only thing that could break through that darkness, which was so important.
I didn't cry in any of those spots, but however, I do find this one of the sort of great moments of sort of television where you see something that is very affecting. That I've always loved this episode for that part where they end up on the sort of the cliff and the things coming out of the ground, and yeah, it's truly one of the special moments of television. I think people who miss this, who wrote the show off as being this sort of ridiculous teen thing, miss the opportunity to see what storytelling could be done, how effectively it could be done, how you could play an arc, how you could, I wouldn't say manipulate people, but take things to the logical conclusion, which sort of comes back to the beginning where we talked about, why does Tara have to die? Tara has to die so you can get to that scene at the end. It's almost Shakespearean in that way, not to sort of overplay it, but, it has to be her, and it has to get to that point at the end or it doesn't really work.
Yeah. And Joss Whedon loves his Shakespeare. Yeah. I mean, he would, as he has said many times, he would, on weekends, the cast would come over to his house and they would do readings of Shakespeare plays. So Shakespeare, I think, is absolutely an apt response to this particular scene. Now, it's interesting that of all the Scoobies, we've talked about Giles, Willow, Xander, someone who doesn't seem to actually play as big a role as the rest of them is Buffy. She's someone who the entire season is propelled by the fact that she's come back to life after being dead. And yet in this finale, it's not so much about her anymore. As Willow says, so many years I've been here as the sidekick, now I get to be the Slayer. Well, she doesn't get to be the Slayer, but she gets to be the focal point. And so does Xander, and so in a sense does Giles. We've also got Anya on the side too. I mean, she is an honorary Scooby now, obviously.
But she has really a bit role in this. And Buffy's stuck down for the pivotal scene.
And that's what I was going to talk about.
Buffy's stuck down in a cave. And
we talked about it. We're like, I always kind of hated this scene with the monsters coming out of the wall. We're like, really? I mean, do we have to deal with this now?
Well, you talk about the need to sort of.
What was your complaint?
Well, I just think it seems ridiculous. You've got this really emotional, significant moment going on. In one place, they clip back to these sort of wall monsters coming out of the wall, and then Buffy and Dawn hacking them with swords. It's just it's kind of ludicrous.
It is ludicrous, and as I said at the time when Rob was like, on the couch saying why, it was one of those things where you kind of, if it had been on our PVR, we would have been jumping past it. But I said it is necessary for Dawn to step out of the shadows, quite literally, grab a sword and work side by side with her sister. That we see that Buffy, she's not a burden to Buffy. Well, She has been throughout the
Already a burden to
season.
Buffy.
She has been. In this one moment, she is not a burden to Buffy. Otherwise, that scene where
they're trying to show growth in the character.
Yes.
Whether they successfully do that or not,
and something that can move us towards season 7.
And not hate Dawn, because he must have been aware at this point that people literally hated the character.
People were driven nuts by her, which is why you have that amazing scene where Dark Willow is like, "Mommy, Mommy."
Do you think that's intentionally written, knowing what the reaction
that
fans
all of
are
us
having
would
to the character?
You know what? I kind of like Dark Willow.
I kind of want to see
I'm
Willow.
with her.
There's no way that Willow will skin Dawn too. That'd be awesome.
Oh, so awful. And even though we haven't really discussed this part much, there is the one other sort of side plot that is played entirely separately from the rest of the action is Spike. Right. So Spike is on his bike. No rhyme intended there. And he takes off to the cave demon, and he does something that seems like it fits more Angel, this sort of trial thing that we've seen over on Angel. And then he gets to the end of it. Now, be careful what you say about what happens at the end, because you don't talk about season 7 in the context at all. But the big question at the end of the season is,
what does he get back?
What does he get? Well, and what was his intention? I think that a lot of fans,
the language leads you to believe one thing,
that Buffy's gonna get hers, and then at the very end, it's like, and now I give you your soul. Was he actually going there to get his soul, or when he said, "Turn me into what I was," he actually meant just take the damn chip out. That's all I want. Again. And the cave demon's like, wah wah, and he's going to trick him. There's the big question at the end of season 6.
I think it's actually
Spike intend to be a soulful vampire, or was he
actually
tricked?
think it's intentionally misleading and maybe sort of clumsily written. I hate to say it, but with the notion where he says that bitch, and he uses such harsh language. She's going to get hers. It sounds like something different. Like he intended. He went for one reason.
That is what he intended. That he intended just to get his chip out, so he could go and give her what she.
And he got a surprise at the end.
And if that's the case, then it wasn't clumsily written.
Right.
Then and then we are surprised at the end. But then the question becomes, and we'll find, we'll be able to discuss this more in season 7. What was he actually going there for? Was he going there to get the soul back? Maybe that was his intention the whole time. So
if that's the intention, then I think the language is misleading. If his intent was just to get the chip out and become a nasty vampire again, then I think, and he got something he wasn't expecting, then I would think it's smartly written. I guess it all depends on your perspective.
This is true. Well, we have come to the end of season 6 in our Buffy rewatch, and we just have one more season. Can you believe it?
Hard to imagine.
You've been watching me doing this rewatch all year long, and it has taken up way too much of my time.
No more big projects for Nikki. Nikki needs to go back and write another book for her fan base.
Well, yeah. Anyway, thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here with the Nikki Stafford superstar.
Shush. And we will say goodbye.
Ta-ta.